Make every obstacle an opportunity. Make every negative a positive. My mother raised me with this rule, and this is how I have lived. In a small town in Texas where I grew up, you were nobody unless you played football. I tried to be a football player, but I was no good, so I wanted to find something else. When I was a boy, I did not get along with my stepfather, which frustrated me. But something happened that gave me a chance to get over this problem. I came across my first bike. I was attracted to it and thought, if I ride the bike on this road long enough, it will take me somewhere better than here. Rain or shine, I kept on pedaling the bike. When I was 13, I won a triathlon for young cyclists. Not long after that, I won another one. I liked the feeling of being a top junior cyclist in the United States. This was how I started my life with the bike. Now, listen to part 2. In 1990, when I was 18, I made my international debut as a cyclist in a race in Utsunomiya, Japan. I was a tough rider, but wasn't good at tactics. I needed to use my energy more effectively so that I would not be exhausted by the middle of the race. Although I did my best, I finished in 11th place. In 1993, I won the World Championship held in Oslo. My racing skills had become better, but still needed improvement. It was in 1995 that I first competed in the Tour de France. I had succeeded in entering the world's toughest race for cyclists, but I was not yet good enough to win it. After the tour, though, I had the feeling that I was coming into the peak of my career. As one of the world's top riders, I had a mansion, a beautiful sports car, and a fortune in the bank. I thought everything would always go well. Then suddenly came the worst obstacle in my life. The true meaning of the word fear became clear to me when I heard the words, "You have cancer." Compared to this fear, the fears I had had before meant nothing. "You have cancer in the lungs and brain," said the doctor. My chance of survival was 40%. I was only 25 and I wanted to live. I went through 3 operations and a long painful series of chemical treatments followed. I was in constant pain and kept vomiting. I thought the treatment was as bad as, or worse than, the disease itself. It lasted 4 full months. Now, listen to part 3. Miraculously, I became a cancer survivor. The question was whether I should get back to my career. Due to the long, hard chemical treatments, I had lost all my muscles and felt too weak to do anything. I thought writing was no longer for me. I heard people say, "Armstrong is finished. He'll never race again." I thought of giving up my career as a professional cyclist. I spent most of my time playing golf and watching TV, but it wasn't fun. I felt neither happy nor free. Just then, my coach came to see me. In the garage, he looked at my bike and knew I had not been riding it. "You're alive again, and now you need to get back to living," he said. Then he suggested setting up a training camp in Boone in the Appalachians. I was not quite ready, but it was the place where I had won 2 races before. It was not a bad place to start again. Taking some time, I made up my mind to get back on my bike. I pedaled many hours day after day. One day, when I was riding uphill in the rain, washed out yellow and white lettering on the road caught my eye. It read, "Viva Lance," which had been written by a spectator who had seen me in a previous race. As I continued upward, I saw more fading letters under my wheels. "Go Armstrong." There I began to see what my life was destined to be. It was simply this: My life was meant for a long, hard climb. I realized what I had to do to win the tour. Now, listen to part 4. I had sacrificed everything and devoted myself to hard training until I took on the challenge of the tour again in 1999. Very few people expected me to win. In the first half of the race, I saved my energy and stayed back. In the middle part of the tour, I took the lead and held on to it. My bike swayed under me as I pedaled along, and I was breathing hard. I kept on riding day in and day out, with my energy balanced over the 3-week race. I was exhausted, but I kept going on. Going into the final 6 kilometers, I pedaled on and on with all I had. When I crossed the finish line, the clock showed that I was 9 seconds ahead of my closest competitor. I won the tour. I once read a newspaper article saying, "Lance flew up the hills and mountains of France." But you never fly up a hill. You struggle slowly and painfully up a hill, and maybe, if you work really hard, you get to the top. Life is full of obstacles, and it is up to you to turn them into opportunities.
Now listen to part 1. After flying about 7,000 kilometers southeast from Japan, you will see from the plane a tiny island nation on the beautiful blue ocean. It is called Tuvalu. The country lies in the middle of the Pacific, just below the equator, about 1,000 kilometers north of Fiji. It has 9 small islands and has a land area of only 26 square kilometers, with its highest point just 5 meters above sea level. Tuvalu has a population of around 11,000 people, most of whom live in the capital city, Funafuti. The Tuvaluans lead a cooperative life, living in harmony with their surroundings and enjoying the benefits of nature. To make a living, they catch fish in the coastal waters and grow coconuts, bananas, and pulaka in their fields. Such a peaceful way of life has lasted for more than 2,000 years, but now it is in danger of disappearing. For some reason, all the islands are now sinking slowly but steadily into the ocean. They are vanishing from the face of the earth. Now listen to part 2. From February until April, something strange happens on the islands at high tide. Seawater comes out through small holes in the ground twice a day. This is because the soil of the islands is made up of sediments of coral reef, and water easily passes through these sediments. Consequently, as the tide rises, the land becomes filled with water like a sponge. This is happening on some parts of the island. Take a look at the pictures below. Normally, there is no water in the square, but as the tide rises, puddles start to appear. The puddles get bigger and bigger and are joined by other puddles. Very quickly, a large area of land becomes flooded with seawater. The water goes up to a level of 50 centimeters or higher in some areas, and it sometimes takes days for the water to go down. One man said, "We used to drink the well water until about 10 years ago, but now we can't drink it. We can't use it for farming either. The well water has too much salt in it. Seawater crabs are now living inside the well." Pointing to his pulaka field, he sighed. "We had to give up growing pulaka. Pulaka cannot survive once their roots are soaked with seawater. Growing it here is just a waste of time." It became difficult to grow many other vegetables on the island as well. As a result, the Tuvaluans had no choice but to depend on food brought in from foreign countries. They were beginning to lose their traditional way of life. Now listen to part 3. The fact that Tuvalu is surrounded by the sea was once a blessing for the Tuvaluans. But now, that same sea is about to take away their homes and way of life. Along the shores were many sandy beaches with palm trees, where children once gathered and played. Such places do not exist anymore. High tides and strong winds have eaten away almost all the sand, as well as palm trees which once lined the shores. "We will stay in this country until we die," said one elderly woman. "Even if it goes down into the sea, I will not leave this island. Our children may have to go away. I want them to live happily in a new place, but I will stay where I am. This is my home." Now listen to Part 4. What this small island nation is facing is not just a local problem, but also a global one. It is believed that daily human activities, especially in industrialized countries, have a lot to do with global warming. Every day we produce a huge amount of greenhouse gases by burning things such as fossil fuels and garbage. Many scientists think that this is speeding up global warming, which leads to melting of polar ice and rising of the sea level. One report shows that the sea level may rise by as much as 88 centimeters in the next 100 years. Tuvalu is not the only nation that is going to be affected by the rising sea level. If the sea level continues to rise, coastlines of many other larger countries, including some of Japan's, will also be under the sea. Tuvalu is now in a critical stage of its long history. The people will lose their homeland if global warming continues. This means that a unique culture that took thousands of years to build will not be passed on to future generations. Can you imagine losing your homeland forever? Such a tragedy may happen to us in the future if we do not act quickly. The future of Tuvalu and the Earth is in our hands.
Now, listen to Part 1. Many people suggest that you should eat something sweet when your brain is tired. This is because sugar is the energy source of the brain. Sugar makes you feel energized. In fact, sugar from food is absorbed into the body and enters the bloodstream just 10 seconds after it is eaten, quickly giving energy to the brain. Sugar is an important ingredient to make cakes and cookies, but it is not just used to make things sweet. Sugar also helps to keep food from going bad. So sweets and foods that have a lot of sugar in them become preserved and last a long time. Interestingly, when you heat up sugar in a pan, it turns into a brown substance called caramel, which has long been used as a safe and natural food coloring in soy sauce, soft drinks, and other food products. As you can see, sugar has a variety of uses. Today, you can find sugar in any store quite easily, but actually, it took a long time for sugar to become widely available. Now, listen to Part 2. Sugar as a food product mainly comes from sugarcane. This plant is native to the islands of the South Pacific and is thought to have spread all over the world through India. In Europe, honey had been used as a sweetener before sugar was introduced. It is said that the first time sugar became known to Europeans was in the 4th century BC, when the army of Alexander the Great brought sugar to Greece from India. Seeing sugarcane there for the first time, the Greek soldiers cried with joy, "A reed of honey without any bees." In the 16th century, when it started to spread among people in Europe, sugar was used as medicine as well as a sweetener. It was recognized as a cure-all, and doctors gave prescriptions of sugar to their patients who were feeling physically weak. Actually, in many developing countries, sugar is still being used to treat children who have diarrhea. There was another interesting use of sugar in history, as ornamental decoration. In the Middle Ages, sugar was extremely expensive. Ornamental decorations made of large amounts of sugar therefore showed the great wealth or power of certain people. Now, listen to part 3. Sugar took on a new role in the 15th century. During this period, several major European countries set up colonies in Central and South America. As sugarcane can only be grown in the tropical and subtropical areas of the world, these areas, including the warm islands of the Caribbean, were suited for the cultivation of sugarcane. The Italian-born mariner Columbus carried sugarcane from Europe with him on his voyages to the Caribbean. After the time of Columbus, plantations began to be built on the islands of the Caribbean, as well as in Brazil and other lands. Large numbers of workers were needed to produce sugar in mass quantities. Unfortunately, the growing demand for sugar accelerated the spread of black slavery in this part of the world. Tens of millions of black people from Africa were sent to these islands and made to work on sugar plantations as slaves. This is why so many people of African descent live on these islands today. People's desire for sugar began to change the course of history. It was in 18th century England that the custom of drinking tea while socializing became very popular, and people enjoyed the taste of tea with sugar. Consequently, the demand for sugar increased, and sugar had to be produced in mass quantities. It may be difficult for you to imagine, but there was a time when slavery was seen as a reasonable system for the mass production of sugar. Because of the desire for sugar in one part of the world, people from a different part of the world were forced into slavery. Now, listen to part 4. Sugar used to be too expensive for most people to get, but mass production made it less expensive. As a result, sugar turned into a common commodity all over the world. Sugar, which was once used as medicine and decoration, became a food product at last. Nowadays, we take sugar for granted, but we should remember that it took a long time for it to become widely available. Sugar is a kind of living history book. Through it and other such commodities, we have a chance to learn about the lives of people in the past and understand why the world has become what it is today. We usually use sugar to make things sweet, but it can be used in another way, to understand our society.
Now listen to part 1. Famous works of children's literature have become widely known to the public through animation. One example of a classic children's story that became an animated film is Moomin. This anime was a hit in Japan and was also shown on TV in some European countries. Many people have seen the sweet-looking character from the anime, but how much do you really know about the world of Moomin? In a survey of 100 Japanese students, the following questions were asked. 1. Do you know anything about Moomin? 2. Do you know where the original story comes from? 3. What impressions do you have of the stories of Moomin? Out of the 100 students, almost 90% answered yes to the first question, but only a quarter knew where the original story came from. In answer to the third question, students gave various impressions: cute, dark, happy, serious, kind, selfish, and so on. What do you think are the reasons for such different impressions?